Kenya has set out a plan to plant 15 billion trees in the next 10 years. That is quite ambitious if you ask me, because it translates to about 1.5 billion trees every year. And the question is, as a country, do we have the capacity or the financial wherewithal to plant this number of trees? This week on Inside Government, we are talking to Chief Conservator of Forest. This is Julius Kamau. He's going to help us understand this plus more other issues. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, give us a background on how we got to 15 billion trees. Why not 5 billion? Why not 1 billion?
Thank you so much for that question. And first of all, is to say that Kenya Forest Service is one of the principal agencies of government that is tasked with the mandate of protecting, conserving, and managing public forests. But beyond that mandate, the Constitution also obliges us that we must also support the county government in terms of providing technical advice. So for them also to manage their community forests and also private farms. In that sense, as we speak today, we have about 2.59 million hectares of public forest within the direct jurisdiction of the Kenya Forest Service, and about 1.79 million hectares under the county government in the arrangement of community forests. And in 2021, we had reached 8.83%. Again, it is growth. And for me to break just to the viewers on the difference between the forest cover and the tree cover, is that in tree cover, even an individual tree on your farm is measured. But for forest cover, it has to fit with the scientific definition, which is for forest, which is defined as an area not less than 0.5 of a hectare, with a closer canopy of not less than 15%, and the trees within there must not be less than 2 meters. So that defines a forest. So you would realize that the tree cover naturally will be a bit higher because it takes individual trees even on farmland, while the forest cover is forest as defined. Now, that was achieved, and the report actually was launched by the President in May 27. And in launching the report, the President then said that, yes, we have attained the 10% tree cover. And 10% tree cover now is at 12.13%, which means about 7.2 million hectares of the forest land is under tree cover. And then good achievement of 8.83% of forest cover, meaning about 5.2 million hectares are under forest cover. But that is not enough for the forests and trees to play their role to ensure that we have what we call environmental integrity, that we have provisions of water, that we are able to mitigate effects of climate change, that we are able to support livelihood of the people. And therefore we had now the President now said we have to push now the agenda and say now we have to push ourselves from the 12.13% in 2022 to 30% tree cover by 2032. That is the directive that has been issued. And to do that, then, we have to use the 12.13% as a baseline, so that then we know what then do we need to do as a country to move from 12.13% to that percent tree cover. And therefore, for a period of time, the most technical officers within the forest sector and Kenya Forest Service and the ministry had to sit down and see how then what numbers are we talking about, so that Kenyans can understand in basic principle what we need to do. And it is very clear that we had to plant 15 billion trees in the next 15 years, or 10 years, to be able to attain the 30% forest cover. But the President went ahead and said, okay, we have the 15 billion target. But in the first 5 years, that is between 2022 and 2027, we will be able to attain 5 billion tree seedlings. And then the run-up 5 years, we do another 10 billion. In essence, if you look at it in terms of numbers, Kenyan population is about 50 million. So if every Kenyan was to plant 300 trees and grow, not plant, grow, because you have to plant and make sure it grows. In the next 10 years, we will attain the target. Bring it back home even closer. If you and I were to plant 30 trees every year, we are there. So that strategy is still under development, is under finalization, because we have to have a document that ties the target with the resources and who will do it. So already a serious team, ministerial team, is working on this to finalize the document, and it will be possibly from the discussions, it will be a special program for forest and landscape restoration.
Very well.
And that program is one that to drive us to go towards that target.
You're looking at breaking down these numbers, and assigning each Kenyan, a certain portion of trees. But realistically speaking and practically speaking, how feasible is it for every Kenyan to plant 300 trees every year?
Many Kenyans in the recent past, including now, have witnessed what drought and what effects of climate change can do to this country. We have lost not less than 2.5 million livestock, meaning we have exposed the life and level of many people. People have suffered. The government has to give them relief food. I think Kenyans now understand more than before what it means that if we don't protect our forests, if we don't green our country, then there is the tragedy of the common. So the question would be, for that farmer, for that individual, what is more a price to pay? Is it to lose 10, 15 cattle in a span of 1 month, or to grow 300 trees? I think your answer is as good as my answer. And by the way, there's no choice, because even during the drought, which was presented 40 years ago, we are lucky as a country that the improved systems of governance that has increased our capability to protect our current forest and water catchment areas made sure that even if it was very dry, our rivers, and you can see one behind here, it is still flowing. This is what has kept people alive in all our catchment areas. And you want to imagine, if this country had destroyed its water catchment areas and we had this serious drought and there was no water, where would we be? And therefore, we can see a possibility of, if we restore our forests, if we reclaim our encroached areas, if we protect it, then we can be able to reduce the impact of climate change. And I give an example, for the Masai Mara. After reclaiming it in 2019 and sustaining a restoration project and program in it, you haven't had, even through the series of the droughts presented after a period of 40 years, in 1984, that wildlife in Masai Mara have died. You haven't had a conversation about the river has dried. The river still flows. That is the power of conservation. Forest is life.
And that one is definitely no doubt that, reforestation and afforestation is the way to go, is the future. And especially it's at this time when now the issues of climate change are becoming more critical. But you are talking about a country where more than 60% of the entire land is considered or graded as arid and semi-arid, meaning that the issues of rainfall, the issues of water, are dire. So how do you ensure, or how will you ensure that the 60% of the country that is considered to be arid and semi-arid is also covered by some form of trees and forest?
In 2016, the country, through the Ministry of Environment, did an assessment. So the assessment was to find out, in this country, what are the potential areas of restoration. And this was to align itself with African restoration commitment of the Bond Challenge, and which Kenya then committed that they're going to restore 5.1 million hectares of their landscapes through that commitment. So for you to commit, you have to know where are you going to plant it. So during that assessment, it was very clear that 8.8 million hectares of the Kenyan land is potential for restoration. 38.8 million. About 39 million hectares. In this strategy of moving from 12.13% tree cover to 30% tree cover, we are going to restore only 10.2 million hectares, okay, of the 38. So there's still a journey ahead. So the area for restoration is not a limitation. This includes our degraded forest areas. As we speak today, it's about 350,000 hectares of public forest is degraded. It's part of that. We look at the riparian areas. We look at the ASAL areas, which present 65% of the potential for restoration. And we look at schools, institutions, roads, avenues, and everywhere. That is what we must do in the next 10 years. But in this strategy, 65% of the investments will go to the ASAL areas. This is arid and semi-arid areas. And that's 65%. And that's why you saw, even when we made a choice of the site where His Excellency the President, Dr. William Ruto, was launching the tree growing campaign in Gong Hill Forest, it was very strategic. Kajiado is one of the ASAL counties. And we said that we're going to demonstrate that it is possible to green ASAL areas, even under difficult circumstances. And we did plant about 5,600 tree seedlings in Gong Hill Forest. It hasn't rained so much, but we have gone ahead to utilize the community forest associations who have given us young people and the youth, who we are now calling the Green Army. And we have been supporting them so that they can also create green job. At the same time, maintain the trees and also at the same time water the trees. And the trees are doing wonderful. This was a clear message that we must stop seeing ASAL areas as a limitation or a deterrent for us to green those areas. But we must be innovative enough and we must change the way of doing things and say, as we green the country, that greening must also create employment to the youths. It also must create green jobs. It must also feed into the micro enterprises so that people with a private tree nursery who must register with the Kenya Forest Service, then we can be able to do business with them so that it is not about only greening, it's creating jobs and creating employment and opportunity for economic growth. So that's why it must succeed, because the interventions and the motivation is also the private sector to play its role and the government to provide enabling environment and for us to do what we must be able to do. So it's a principle of leaving no one behind.
I want to understand, and you are talking about the Green Army, which is a very interesting concept, but how many Green Army members do you need to ensure that 1.5 billion trees are, number one, planted, and number two, taken care of? Because the issue is not just a question of planting, there is also the question of ensuring that the trees are well tended and they grow.
There are as many as Kenyans. So I am a Green Army. You are a Green Army because we have a commitment. And we have said this. It has to stop the very popular narrative that greening this country is a government agenda or is a government responsibility. No. Kenyans, wherever they are, must accept that they must be patriotic to their own nation. People today who are of my age and younger got some trees that already had grown many years, and they have benefited from those trees. But they are not willing to bend down and plant a tree for the future generation. We must say that we owe it to the future. And I keep bringing it back home and say, look, I have been able to enjoy this wonderful environment in this country. I would wish my son and my daughter and my grandchildren enjoy a similar environment. But how can I guarantee that? I must ensure that I sacrifice also, as they did sacrifice, and ensure that I become part of the movement. So it's not about the government, not about Kenya Forest Service. It's about me as a patriotic Kenyan. It's my national duty to support and cooperate with the government to ensure that we guarantee clean and healthy environment. I also come back this way, and because of where we are today. During the COVID-19, we got very good response. It was harsh, but I think it became very clear that when everything else disintegrates, we seek refuge to the environment. We received many people in our forests. When they could not go anywhere, they found solace in the forest. And therefore, nature cannot be contested. We must do this. And it's a principle of leaving no one behind. And we are saying, if you are grown up and your child cannot be able to plant a tree, as much as you love them, please go down and plant trees for them. And you can utilize many opportunities. It could be birthdays, which we love so much, and we celebrate every year. And that's why the president dedicated his birthday, to demonstrate that he could plant or inspire the growing of 560,000 tree seedlings in a day. If all of us was to do that, then we can get there possibly sooner than even we have said.
What strategies are you going to put in place, or mechanisms are you going to put in place to ensure that 1.5 billion trees are indeed planted?
One, it's this awareness we are creating now, telling Kenyans the reason why they should plant the trees. And we are saying, don't just plant trees for the sake of it. If you are a farmer, we also want the tree to make sense to you. If you're a farmer somewhere, for example, in Mount Kenya or in Kwale or in Bungoma, plant the trees on the farm that can support you for various reasons. It could be a fruit tree, a mango tree. It is still a tree, but it will support your livelihood. It will also support us in dealing with the issues of food security. If it's about timber that you want, grow a tree that can give you timber. If it's firewood, do the same. If it's about conservation, do the same. So that you have a tree that you don't have to be reminded to take care of it. It is your duty to protect it because it's also protecting you and cushioning you from the impact of climate change, but more so for food security. So we want to also make sure that we match the tree growing campaign with the aspirations and the needs of Kenyans. For the state organ like Kenya Forest Service, we are very clear. We have 350,000 hectares degraded. We have adopted a forest framework where we tell Kenyans and corporates to come and adopt that area. And you prepare it and grow trees for 3 to 5 years, then surrender it back to Kenya Forest Service. Today, we have about 120 partners working with us, and they have adopted 80,000 hectares of degraded forest areas, and they are restoring it. And many more are coming.
How will you be able to measure how many trees have been planted every year?
As I said, what cannot be measured cannot be managed. I started by saying that we did an assessment, wall-to-wall assessment, of the tree resources in Kenya in 2021. Normally, it's supposed to be done within 5 years. But we are now doing what we call tracking and monitoring of the tree being grown. And already a system is being developed within the ministry so that when you plant, actually it will be a mobile app where when you plant, it georeferences where you are and the trees that you have planted. And they come to a common dashboard and they're able to tally that you're able to know on a daily basis how many trees are being planted. On 21st of December, when the president officiated this national tree growing campaign, the trees that were planted that day were actually, he launched that tracking system where the tree planted of the day were actually recorded and they were known that were actually recorded. So the tracking process is as good as planting because we also don't own plants and maybe we don't have survival rates. So there is already a mechanism to do the tracking and monitor on real time when you are planting the trees as you go forth. In any case, another inspiration is that when you plant your 300, when you grow your 300 tree seedlings as a Kenyan, and within 3 years they have survived, you have a way of actually, and the government has set a way of actually giving what we call certificate of green conduct. People know about the certificate of good conduct, but we want to have a certificate of green conduct so that
As a motivation.
As a motivation, so that even when you are going to seek for a job, when you are going to seek for a job to be engaged with the army, national police, a forest ranger, as added value, you can present a green certificate. Once you produce that, it will give you an edge to do so. And we know if Kenyans were to use it as an incentive, many Kenyans would want to actually do so. So we believe that also will encourage Kenyans and it will become a credential that you can present and demonstrate that actually you have a green agenda and you have cooperated with the government to make Kenya a safe, clean, and of health environment.
Have you also thought about coming up with some sort of a scheme whereby you have some sort of a reward scheme for people who you would consider to be the green heroes of the year?
Yes, we have been in the discussion about having what we call honorary foresters. Honorary foresters is something we believe we'll be working on with the ministry because of policy guidance, so that for those people who are not necessarily foresters, but have done so much in terms of supporting the government effort for greening and protecting these resources, then they can be recognized as forest, as what you can say, honorary foresters, basically. And I think that would be good enough. And it is already actually provided for in the Forest Conservation Management Act 2016. So it's a question of actually making it happen. So it's anchored in the law. It's not something you're going to think about. It's something already provided for within the law.
Let's talk about the capacity. I mean, do we have 1.5 billion seedlings in this country?
The reason why the president said we do 5 billions in the first 5 years and 10 billion in the run-up 5 years is recognition that you require to do certain things for you to be able to grow trees. And that means that Our sister entity, KEFRI, who deal with the seed collection, their capacity has been enhanced. So they are able to produce quite large tonnage of seeds that can support KFS, who also produce seedlings, and other private sector to be able now to grow seedlings. Seedlings take about 6 to 1 year. So there is a period for investment for seeds and also seedling production. And then we now the campaign for growing them. Of course, many community groups, many youth groups are still having their seedlings on their nurseries, and that will be part of what we are doing. Two, there's a possibility of government off-taking some of the seedling produced by the private sector. That is also a motivation that the private sector can also, once they are registered with the Kenya Forest Service and they are certified by KEFRI, then they could do business with the government, because the government then could be able to procure seedlings from them, because we know first they have good quality and they have good health. And therefore, that's another way of growing the small enterprises, by knowing that, one, they grow for the normal market because you grow and people will buy, but also if there are opportunity to do business with the government, then they will be primary candidate for that.
What is the production capacity of seedlings for the two entities, that is Kenya Forest Service and Kenya Forest Research Institute?
I won't talk about KEFRI because they produce seeds, but the seedlings, Kenya Forest Service is about 300 tree nurseries across the country. 300. We believe if we made some certain investment to improve the status of those nurseries, we can actually push ourselves to talk about 300 million tree seedlings as a government. But we know, and the principle of this whole strategy is that half of the seedlings will be produced by the government, but half by the private sector. 7.5 billion from the government and 7.5 billion from the private sector. And we hope with time, the private sector can actually do more than government, because that means that we are providing good environment for the business and the private sector to thrive. And that provides employment for the youth who earn that kind of a job, because many youths are actually jobless.
And if you are talking about your current production capacity of 300 million, it means that you need to upscale this by another 200 million seedlings. How soon, or what is the turnaround time for you to do that?
I believe once the strategy is developed and launched, of course there will be resource mobilization, because I also know that the government may not necessarily fund from the exchequer for the entire, because the program, it will cost us 500 billion Kenya shillings to execute, to move from where we are to where we want to go. Yes, yes. 500 billion. 500 billion. Of course, yes. That's a huge amount of money. So even if you are to divide by 10 years, you can see how many billions will be required almost every year. And we know the government also is facing challenges in terms of finances. So we cannot expect it to be funded by the public sector. We hope that it will be a business case that can attract funding from the private sector. And the private sector is able to do so. We have seen some big corporates adopting forest areas to restore. And they have the capacity to buy seedlings from the community groups. And that is the way we would want it. So that the smaller enterprises are being pulled by the larger enterprises. That is the model we want to see as we go forth.
I saw a research that was done by the American Geoscience Institute, where they are saying that the world has about 13 trillion trees, and the world is losing about 15 billion trees every year. Is it possible for us to do that kind of a research to know how many trees we have in the country and how many trees we are losing every year? Because in the next 10 years, it is given we are also going to lose a number of trees. Yes. I don't know how many trees. Yes. And so we also need to know what is the conversion rate, so that as we plan to plant 15 billion trees, we must sort of have a strategy of replenishing the trees that we are also going to lose.
And I agree with you. And that's why I said about the tree monitoring or tree growing tracking system. That means it's able to track. When you plant, it counts the numbers. For example, on the day that we launched it, the program, any tree planted under that initiative was counted. And then you have to monitor whether those trees are growing, so that then you can say, okay, you've grown maybe 100 trees, but unfortunately 10 of them died, meaning that you cannot report 100, but you can report 90. That is why the tracking now going forward will help us to take count of every single tree that is being grown in the country.
Paint for us how Kenya will look like in the year 2032.
Well, if I may disclose where we are today, and where we are holding this interview is a wonderful place to be. COVID taught us oxygen, which we take for free and for granted, is not for granted. There's a time when hospitals in Kenya said they don't have enough supply of oxygen. Trees give us oxygen. We breathe out carbon dioxide, which is actually a problem for global warming. But trees are kind enough to take it, process it, and give us oxygen, which we require for life. So what we see in the future and what I would envisage in 2032, if we are to get to 30% tree cover, which I know we'll get there, is first of all, Kenyans will have clean water, safe drinking water. They will have clean and healthy environment to live in. They will not lose their livestock from drought. Individual farmers will not be exposed to the harsh impact of losing their livelihood from aggravities of climate change like drought or floods. And where you have an integrated or a health integrity, then even energy, because water also helps us get energy. Forests also help us get medicine. They help us deal with the issue of food security. Because, for example, we are talking about using irrigated agriculture in this country to increase food production. Without sustainable water supply, you cannot talk about food. So we are talking about a nation that is able to feed itself, able to access water, and also living in a clean, healthy environment. Therefore, longer days to live in this world.
I know the president has given the go-ahead for the recruitment of 2,700 rangers and 600 forest officers. Yes. Is this number enough for the Herculean task ahead?
We have an establishment of about 5,000 rangers, okay? Right now we are short half of that. So if we got the 2,700, we are at full capacity. It doesn't mean that that is enough to take care of every single tree in the country. But it has a critical mass to help us deal with the issues of, first of all, protecting what we have. Because it's also one thing to grow to 30%, but we must not forget, we must protect anything that we have and whatever we may be able to do, so that we also don't lose.
Finally, what is your message to the Kenyans who are watching this program and they're interested in getting on board on this project of 1.5 billion trees every year?
This is not a government initiative or a government thing to do. It is for all of us as Kenyans. If today you're opening a tap and drinking water from it, if today you are accessing water from a river, if today you are enjoying that good air that we breathe in, oxygen, if you have traveled and you have done adventure in a forest ecosystem, if you are in a farm and enjoying agroforestry food production system, if your animal is feeding on fodder coming from tree, if you are cooking using firewood, if your house is constructed by timber, then you have a price to pay. You must be able to help us plant and grow trees, not for Kenyans, but for yourself and for the future generation. So it's a call for each of us, and we must demonstrate our patriotism to this nation to save ourselves from the tragedy of the common, and save ourselves and transmit and hand over a nation which is healthy enough to our loved ones who will come into the future.
Thank you very much indeed, Julius Kamau, for joining us and of course for your passionate message about tree planting. We wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, and we need your support, and as you are doing.
Very well.
Yes.
Asante sana.
Thank you so much.
Well, the conversation has been around planting trees, and as the Chief Conservator of Forests has said, the buck stops with every one of us. We must embrace and inculcate a culture of planting trees. This program has been coming to you from the exquisite and the serene Karura Forest right here in Nairobi. My name is O'Brien Kim, and we have been talking to the Chief Conservator of Forest. This is Julius Kamau from the Kenya Forest Service. Thank you very much for your time. We'll see you again on Friday next week. Bye for now.